An incredibly important ancient scroll was found early on in the rush to comb the Dead Sea caves following the initial discovery of the scrolls by the Bedouin. It was discovered in situ in 1956 in what came to be known as Cave 11, but it didn't come to light until the late 1970s. That was when Israeli archaeologist Yigael Yadin, who procured it from Kando after the 1967 Six-Day War, finally published a massive translation of the text with voluminous commentary. It is known simply as the Temple Scroll. It is the longest of all the Dead Sea Scrolls, at least 65 columns in length. Some of its content looks very early, dating to the 2nd century BCE. But carbon-14 dating places it between 97 BCE and 1 CE. Hercule Poirot here, the world's greatest detective. The Temple Scroll is astounding in its own right because it uses deliberately and repeatedly the secret Hebrew name of God, Yud Hey Vav Hey or YHWH, which, as we learned from the Damascus Rule, the members of the sect would not normally do. For this reason, along with the fact that God speaks directly in the first person in the scroll, it seems likely that the sect actually considered this to be an additional canonical book of the Torah, a 6th book of Moses. As for the contents of the scroll, it describes a future temple to be erected in Jerusalem in the end of days. It would be erected on Mount Moriah, the site where Abraham was said to have raised the sacrificial knife to slay his son Isaac, only to be stopped by an angel at the last moment. It would replace the present temple, which King Herod the Great embellished and which the sect considered to be corrupt. Its dimensions are hardly a realistic blueprint. The structure is absolutely enormous, dwarfing even King Herod's massive temple complex, which at the time was considered one of the wonders of the world. It's important to note that the Temple Scroll is not entirely hypothetical, describing some future day and age. In some ways, it gives us some valuable information on actual conditions during some of the most pivotal times in human history. Beyond describing the building, furniture, and cultic worship of the temple, it details sacrifices on Sabbaths and many festival days. The fact that the scroll features so prominently among the sectarian library underscores the likely reason that the sect broke away from the rest of Israel in the first place. At the heart of a great ancient dispute was the Jerusalem priesthood, comprising the party known as the Sadducees, who in the eyes of many had become corrupt. In fact, the ancient priestly class of Sadducees had allied themselves with King Herod the Great and his predecessors, who in turn was allied with the Romans. They had grown fat and complacent, their coffers being filled with the mandatory tithes paid directly to the Jerusalem temple. Incidentally, they also denied the concept of the resurrection of the dead. Because of this corruption, we can deduce that some people, decided to abandon the city of Jerusalem and to retire to a secluded settlement in the desert. Among them were the Dead Sea sectarians led by the teacher of righteousness. The Qumran sect had its own priests, called the Sons of Tzadok, the true, genuine priests, who have not been allured by the corruption of Jerusalem. They were to officiate at the new temple. But even this grandiose temple was only a human-made temple, perhaps only to stand until God miraculously reveals a heavenly temple, which will be established supernaturally. Could it be that the members of the sect were waiting for two temples? For a physical temple that they would build and a supernatural structure created by God? God relates in first person that he will dwell with his people for eternity and establish this temple forever in fulfillment of the covenant made with Jacob at Bethel, Isaac at Gerar, and Abraham at Haran. V'akdasha et mikdashi bichvodi, asher ashkin alav et kvodi, ad yom habriya, asher evra ani et mikdashi. We should stress that the sectarians still respected Jerusalem and still respected the temple. They simply longed for a better temple, a future temple which God would build through supernatural agency. The temple scroll does more than speculate about the temple the sect was to build. It sets down specific dimensions for the structure and specifies an entire system of rigid purity laws regulating the sanctity of the structure and all that it contains. We read, V'asita bait lema'alot, maseva b'bait asher tivne lishmi alav, v'aseh kachol asher anochi medaber elecha. As this scroll unfolds its vision, everything is represented in detail, including the nature of the sacrifices to be offered upon the altar. Additional pillared courtyards and chambers and enormous gates of symbolic meaning, everything is to be made according to the supernatural pattern revealed from on high. But the visionary edifice and its vast courtyards were never to be constructed, since the sons of light were destined to disappear mysteriously before the blueprint could ever be closed in reality. The scroll also adds two new festivals to the Jewish calendar: the Feast of New Wine and the Feast of Wood, following 50 and 100 days after the Feast of Shavuot, respectively. Bimei HaShabbatot, Rimei HaChadasha, Rimei HaBechorim, LaDagan, LaTirosh, UleYitzhar, Uvemoed Korban Ha'etzim, Ba'ele Hayamim Ye'echal Velo Yanicho. With regard to the term new wine, we should point out that for the sake of healthful sobriety, common table wine, prevalent in the world beyond, was often replaced with what is called tirosh in Hebrew. It's rendered as new wine and consists of the unfermented fruit of the vine, essentially grape juice. This might well represent a sectarian accommodation to those who had taken Nazirite vows, which required perpetual abstinence from strong drink. Josephus wrote, Nor is there ever any clamor or disturbance to pollute their house, but they give every one leave to speak in their turn, which silence thus kept in their house appears to foreigners like some tremendous mystery, the cause of which is that perpetual sobriety they exercise, and the same settled measure of meat and drink that is allotted them, and that such as is abundantly sufficient for them. The first section of this part of the scroll has suffered damage and cannot be discerned. Little is known about these feasts beyond what remains. How will these feasts celebrated? What particular rituals must have accompanied the consumption of a tithe, that is, a tenth of the grain harvest? A tithe of the new wine and a tithe of the oil. In what manner was wood to be burned as an offering? Such details are consigned to the realm of speculation. All that can be discerned from the ancient text itself is the date of the festivals. The first fruits of the grain harvest corresponds with the Jewish Feast of Weeks, or Shavuot, and was to be held on the 15th day of the third month. The New Wine Festival was to occur on the third day of the 5th month. The New Oil Festival was to be held on the 22nd day of the 6th month. The Wood Festival was consigned to some period between the 23rd day and the 30th day of the 6th month. The months themselves follow not the Jewish lunar calendar, but a sectarian solar calendar, in which the spring festival of Passover falls on the 14th day of the first month. With regard to the sect's culinary habits, the scroll also provides some clues regarding foods considered fit or kosher, some of which might shock contemporary palates. השלח והחסידה והענפה למינה והדוכיפת והעטלף כל שרץ העוף ההולך על ארבע שקץ הוא לכם את אלה משרץ העוף תאכלו הערבה למינו והחורגול. The cormorant is a large bird related to the pelican, which lives in and around the water. Storks and herons are related to one another, both equipped with long legs and beaks. Such birds would have been hunted in the desert oases, which crop up among the cliffs intermittently from Jericho to En Gedi, well to the south of the main sectarian settlement. The hoopoe, known for its hoop-hoop call, is distinctive for the plumage on its head, fawn-colored feathers with black tips. The bat is a quintessential cave dweller known to the crevices around the main settlement. Often feared across North Africa and the Middle East, the desert locust, or Schistocerca gregaria, is the species referred to in the Hebrew Bible and the scrolls of Qumran. While this passage is largely a reworking of the 11th chapter of Leviticus, the foods listed are certainly chosen for a reason and may provide some interesting details about the kind of diet the community is accustomed to. The temple scroll seems to depict a great sacrificial feasting, which shall take place in some splendid future age when a renewed priesthood shall officiate over the ceremonial slaughter of animals and subsequent consumption of copious quantities of meat, wine, and grain offerings. Reach nichoach lifnei Hashem, v'tikrav kol mincha asher karav ima nesech kemishpat. There's one more aspect of the temple scroll to consider, especially given its dating, and that has to do with its impact on the study of comparative religion. Yigael Yadin suggested that the scroll may help us understand the behavior of Jesus during his final days, specifically his movements. One rather mysterious passage from the temple scroll enlightens us a good deal here. The text maintains that Jerusalem is so sacred in its status that lepers are to be isolated to the east of the city. With that in mind, consider the gospel account that Jesus visits the home of Simon the leper in Bethany just prior to his triumphal entry into Jerusalem on what came to be called Palm Sunday. When Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came up to him with an alabaster flask of very expensive ointment, and she poured it on his head as he sat at table. Matthew 26, 6-7. Bethany, it just so happens, is located on the ridge of the Mount of Olives, due east of the city, and was likely the location of an ancient leper colony. Bethany is also where a man named Lazarus lived, in the story of his resurrection at the command of Jesus after 4 days in the tomb. Lazarus may in fact have died of this disease. The temple scroll, it seems, is recording an actual fact about the isolation of lepers, and Jesus was, as Yadin suggested, deliberately defiling himself by contact with lepers, or at least a leper colony, so as to take a swipe at the hyper-religious sectarians of his day, who were so very concerned with ritual purity. Contact with lepers is, of course, the worst thing one can do on the day before arriving at the holy city, and it may well be no accident that Jesus chooses to lodge here. One more interesting detail from the temple scroll tells us that crucifixion was a specific penalty used frequently in antiquity as a capital punishment reserved for traitors. The passage reads, Al pi shnaim edim va'al pi shlosha edim yumat, v'hema yitlu oto ha'etz. There is a final detail regarding Jesus' crucifixion recorded in the Gospel of John that is independently verified by the temple scroll. John writes, Since it was the day of preparation, in order to prevent the bodies from remaining on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. John 19:31. The temple scroll declares, Velo talin nivletama al ha'etz, ki kavur tekuvarma bayom hahu, ki makulale elokim ve'anashim. Of course, the scroll never mentions Jesus by name, nor does it claim that the Messiah is to be crucified. But the chilling description of this brutal death certainly verifies the fact of crucifixion and its meaning, branding the victim as one who has cursed his own people. In the final analysis, the temple scroll provides tantalizing evidence not only of the brutal realities of that ancient time, but of the hopes and dreams of this long-vanished desert sect, living in desert seclusion, yet tied in their collective psyche to the eternal, sacred heart of the Jewish faith. The rich intonations of this text reverberate across the centuries and into the present day. The sentiments expressed are truly timeless. There is, however, one additional text that may or may not be related to the temple scroll. It was pieced together from fragments and is known as the New Jerusalem Scroll. It appears to contain a detailed description of the holy city at the end of days. Its Aramaic text describes an enormous rectangular city enclosed by a wall containing 12 gates. Scholars are immediately reminded of the depiction of the New Jerusalem in the New Testament book of Revelation, chapters 21 and 22, as well as the eschatological vision of Ezekiel 40 to 48. A number of similarities with the temple scroll are apparent, though there are no direct literary links. It has been argued that the New Jerusalem scroll is dependent on the temple scroll, since the measurements and data found in the two texts correlate well. But it has been argued to the contrary, that there are almost no similarities between them with respect to genre, basic form and content, and architectural design. In any case, the text is intriguing enough in its own right. The city's dimensions are as follows. Veshavak socher sahur leparzita, brit shuk kinyan, talta amin, esrin v'chada, v'chadan achaziani, mishchat parzia kulhen, ben pirza la pirza, Shuk pate kinyan, shte amin, arba'in vetartin. The text explains that the main streets passing from east to west are 10 staffs and that the width of the street was 70 cubits. Another street on the north of the temple was 18 staffs wide. All of the streets were paved with white stone. Bottom line, however we understand this text, it certainly bears witness to the sect's fascination with eschatology and their particular vision of a new age inaugurated by divine will. Its far-reaching implications go to the heart of religious expression from distant antiquity to the present. Its sectarian voice, like that of the temple scroll, has awakened from long slumber and is speaking once again.